Yo, 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 what's up, Narwhals? This is Mr. Cantwell, and I'm back with Doc.
Hi, everybody.
So, we just read The Ravine, and I think if we stick to the plan that we have right now, The Ravine is the first short story that you read in September, and I think it was a pretty good one. So, now we're going to take some of my favorite questions, and they're easy questions, to try to figure out what the author was getting at. What was the whole point of that story? Because we go to English class to learn to read stuff and then figure out what the author is getting at and then figure out how that applies to us and the world. So our first big question is, why did the author write this? And I think the author wrote this because he wanted to tell a story about peer pressure and doing what you think is right. Ultimately, Vinny got to the top of that ravine. He gave it a shot, but he had this conflict inside of him, this strong, complicated internal conflict. He ultimately decided that it didn't feel right. He didn't want to do it. So, despite the fact that he knew his friends were probably going to judge him for it, he decided not to. So, I think the author was trying to give us a story about a kid who was in a situation where he felt like his friends were going to make fun of him if he didn't do something, and he still didn't do it, even though he knew he was going to get it from his friends a little bit.
Now, a second helpful question is, what lesson did the author want his readers to learn? One lesson from this one could be that when facing a moral decision, it's not necessary to cave to peer pressure. Was it really that dangerous? It's okay for them to do it, but you don't have to. Is it okay to say I don't want to because I'm uncomfortable?
And I think like it's you made the point before we even recorded about how we're not sure how actually dangerous this thing was. The 15-foot drop, the little one, that's we can pretty confidently say no. If that's an easy thing. Even Vinny wouldn't have probably had a problem jumping off of that. But we have four different characters at this ravine, and there's four different perspectives there. We, because the narrator was kind of following inside of Vinny's head, we hear an in-depth breakdown of what Vinny is thinking, but we don't hear what the other characters are thinking. So we don't really have a 100% accurate view of the situation. We only have Vinny's side of things, and Vinny came into this afraid of heights and a little bit apprehensive in general. So yeah, I agree with your point there. And I would follow up with a different lesson that the author wanted his readers to learn, and it's actually to maybe give a thought to things and give a chance to things that you might see as scary, which might seem not what you'd expect for me to say, but a lot of things that you want to do are going to seem scary if it's different. But I think it's important always to give everything a fair assessment. Really think about if it's the right thing to do, what the consequences are going to be in different situations and different outcomes. And if you give a fair assessment and you think really hard about should I do this or should I not do this, and you decide, yeah, I think I need to give it a shot. Well, maybe there's times you should face that fear and overcome it. But then there's going to be other times, like Vinny at the top of this ravine, where you give it the fair assessment, you gave it a shot, and you still decide, yeah, this is not for me.
Now, a third question: what does the story remind us of in our own lives? I remember a time that I tried to do something that was not scary exactly, but uncomfortable. I was having breakfast once each month with a guy that I liked very much, but has very very different views, and I and it was a person who. Was suffering in some ways. I wanted to be friendly to him and understanding and be a good listener. Um, but it was so uncomfortable because he said things that were offensive sometimes. Um, and I remember in one of our breakfasts in particular, he made a statement. He told a racist joke.
Mm.
It was just so unacceptable and caused me to reflect on a relationship that I had to think about another friend. I thought I just could not allow my other friend to hear me participating in this conversation. I would have been so ashamed. I just felt that this was a line I could not go over. I couldn't jump off of that cliff.
Mm,
That's something I was not willing to do. And I felt really good and really clear about that decision.
maybe peace, like Vinny felt.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so you were in this situation where your peers, this person you were having breakfast with, wanted you to be okay with something that you weren't okay with, and you had to make a decision: do I stand up and tell them it's wrong, or not? Just like Vinny had to make a decision about jumping off the cliff. And the peer pressure, caving into peer pressure answer would be to just let it go. But standing up and doing what you think is right is probably the right decision to make a lot of times.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
And I had another little reminder. I tried really hard to think of something that would be like appropriate for like an 11-year-old, like something that happened to me in middle school. And I realized, like, okay, these guys are in sixth grade, the people listening to this, and that means that sports are about to kick up in a little bit of intensity next year, because that's when school sports start. Things start getting a lot more intense and serious. I just thought back to a couple times where I had never played a sport before, and I didn't know anything about it. And a lot of times, like wrestling, rugby, later in my life, jujitsu. I didn't know anything about this stuff. And it was really scary. It was really scary. And it would have been, there were times where I thought, like, I don't want to do that. I don't know anything about that. I might embarrass myself. And I'm glad that I gave it a fair chance, because the three things I mentioned are sports that I ended up sticking with for a long time. But I gave him a fair shot. And even though I felt a little bit scared to jump in and try it, I still gave it a shot. I will also say that there were other sports. Lacrosse is the big one that's coming to my mind, where, I felt the same thing. I don't know anything about lacrosse, but I'm going to give it a shot. I went to the first couple practices and decided this was not for me. But I didn't let the fact that I was afraid of the change, or I was afraid of something new, prevent me from fairly thinking about it and then giving it a shot. And we have our final big question: how will this story change the way that we think and act in the future? I guess for me, it kind of comes down to the same point that I keep making. And that's, I really credit Vinny for overcoming like 80% of his fear. It's easy to focus on the fact that Vinny didn't jump. It's very easy to focus on that because that is the climax of the story, that Vinny didn't jump. But you also need to credit Vinny. Vinny climbed higher than he has ever climbed before. He surpassed what he thought was his limitation. He tried. He ultimately got to the top and figured out, this is not for me, but he tried. I think that was probably felt very good for him, and that was part of the peace that he felt at the end of it, because he has something to be proud of. And so, how will that change the way I think and act in the future? Well, I'm going to do that too. I'm not automatically going to discount something or say I'm not doing it just because it's not something I've done before, or because I'm a little bit scared of it. And I think also, like, celebrating small victories too, like the fact that he climbed up higher than he has ever climbed before. That should be considered a W.
I like that very much. The idea that we should at least try to face our fears and that good can come of it. But in the end, uh, I know I used to want to be a nurse. I wanted to go back to Haiti and work with the Sisters of Charity. And I realized I faint when I see blood. And I, I just had to face that about myself, that I'm not going to do that. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's who I am. And I accept that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had like one last thought to tag on to that because of what you just said. Vinny could have left that forest and been beating himself up in his head, like, "Oh man, you're such a wuss, man. Why didn't you do that? What are they gonna think about you?" But he has this internal kind of revelation that he's okay with the fact that he's just scared of heights and he doesn't want to jump, and it's okay.
Yeah.
You realize, like, you really want to do this thing, but there's a part of it, blood, that seems like you're going to bump into some blood sometimes when you're a nurse, and
Right. Right.
that prevented you from doing it, and it's okay. Um, it might not be okay. Like if you had never tried or never really thought about it and shut down immediately, well, that would be a different story. But if you give it a fair shot and you think about like what the consequences are going to be and what the real risks are and if it what it realistically is going to look like, if you consider all that stuff and you decide this ain't for me or I don't want to do this or something like that, it's okay. You got to be okay with that for yourself. All right. Well, Doc, thank you so much for doing this with me. I hope the kids enjoy it. And we hope you guys enjoyed the Ravine, our read along, and the big questions. I think this week in the lesson that's following up, you're going to learn about, I think it's plot, protagonist, and setting. So that'll be your next step on the video lessons. We will see y'all later.